Hello, friends, and welcome. Welcome to this panel discussion on demystifying the law school admission process. I'm your kind of your one of your Vanna Whites, I suppose, one of your moderators. My name's Ethan. I'm the college essay guy. I use he, him pronouns. I am excited to be here and to be sort of, I guess hosting, I suppose, is what I'm doing a little bit. Today we're going to talk about, we shared this in the email that you were invited to, but we're going to talk about what do law school rankings really mean? How do you create a list, and why is the T14 framework, and you may or may not know what that is. We'll talk about that in a little bit, why that can be a dangerous paradigm. We're going to talk about what law schools are looking for in a personal statement. What weight do admission officers give to different components of the application? What are some do's and don'ts? And in case you're wondering, we will definitely share out the recording and all the links that we discuss after this. So welcome. If you're watching this live, feel free to share in the chat what's something that you're present to. That's what we were checking in just before we hit record. If you're watching the recording, you can just think, what are you present to? If you've got questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. The format will go as such. We're going to do intros here briefly. We're going to get into the questions, some of the questions that we prepared that we think we're going to be most useful for the most folks, but there's definitely going to be time for Q&A. So feel free to throw those in the chat, and our awesome moderator, Renee, will tee us up with those. We have a behind the scenes Google Doc here. But you're going to meet, I'm going to introduce all the panelists in just a second, but let's start with Christine. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about, Christine's the head of our grad division, share a little bit about, set context for us, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. So yeah, I'm the other Vanna White. So I guess the letters you can have today are a J and a D. So you might know us from our undergrad work, and you might know that we're getting pretty famous for the amazing work that our coaches do helping high schoolers apply to college. But what you might not know is that we actually have an entire graduate division. And we are now covering all of the professional degrees. So tonight, law school, but we also help folks with med school and business school applications, as well as basically all of the academic degrees, anything from the humanities, if they still exist, to the social sciences and the STEM programs. So if you happen to know anyone who isn't interested in law school, but is considering some other kind of advanced degree, we'd love it if you would spread the word, help us spread the word. But in terms of law school, we've got some amazing coaches who are all either lawyers or law school admissions representatives and have insider knowledge of how this process works. And I want to share before I turn it over to them that I myself remain fully convinced that I am a legal expert in all arenas of the law. But my lawyer sister always puts me in my place and reminds me that most of my so-called facts were garnered from Law and Order. So to put you in better hands, I will kick it back to Ethan, who can introduce our panelists.
Lovely. Thanks, Christine. So I'll name you and then maybe just wave so folks know who you are in case they're not seeing your names. So Amy, first of all, got her undergraduate degree from Tufts in American Studies and English, JD from Fordham Law School, where she worked as the articles and book reviews editor on the Fordham International Law Journal, has a master's degree in higher education leadership policy studies from Hofstra, practiced complex civil litigation at law firms in Manhattan and on Long Island, has taught legal writing to law students for almost 25 years. Barbara has over 25 years experience in the legal field as an advocate, editor, publisher, law school coach. Her superpower is helping law school applicants weave purposeful and powerful personal statements. She worked at Lewis and Clark's Law School Career Services Center, got her JD from the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law, and a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. And Helena has been working both as a coach with College Essay Guy for a number of years, and is working also as a seasonal admission officer, reading for a liberal arts college in LA. Has over 30 years experience working in higher education, including assistant dean for student engagement at a New York City law school, where she oversaw student counseling, student leadership programs, community development, retention, and academic support programs. Helen is a graduate of Wesleyan, bachelor's in American Studies, master's in education from Harvard. So no big deal, just, some, bosses on this call. So let's start with setting a little bit of context. I want to give this one to you, Barbara, to start off here. If you were to take the view of an admission officer, would you rather read a personal statement that's, say, narrowly focused on an applicant's journey to law school and what they intend to do with their law degree, or a law school personal statement that brings in some of these other interests and passions and skills?
Ethan, you gave me the opportunity to use my favorite phrase that I learned in law school, and that every single person who has spoken to a lawyer or goes to law school will know, and that is, it depends. So I think non-lawyers hate that reference, but the reality is that for evaluating things, especially when they relate to law, it depends is most often the answer. And the good news is, I'll give you the second part, which is it really does depend on what law school do I work for? What law school am I representing? Because each law school truly has their own way that they want the student or the applicants to describe themselves. And so this is a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about how crucial it is to really research your school and put the time into where you want to go really research what they want. Because, for example, Harvard is very clear what they want. They've got multiple questions, and one of the questions is, give us your statement of purpose, translation, and it's clear in the question, the way they word the question. Why do you want to go to law school here? Or not even the here, but why do you want to go to law school? But other schools, Lewis and Clark in Oregon, for example, they want you to tell a true kind of more traditional personal statement, not just why you want to go to law, but also what is it about you that you want them to know? What are your passions? What are your interests? What are your other skills? So it's a little bit different than applying to undergraduate school, where you can use one personal statement through the Common App. You really have to research, what does each law school want? So it really does depend.
I love that. And I want to get more into the specifics of the personal statement in just a minute, some of the mechanics of it and the particulars, especially of how do you make it sound different for different schools. But to zoom back a second, Amy, could you talk a little bit about, just so folks have context, what is this, the T14 framework? And the larger zoom out question is, what do rankings matter?
Very interesting question to ask a legal academic, but I have to start by saying I've never watched any episode of Law and Order of any of the franchises. I do have to start out by saying that.
You did not miss anything.
Thank you, Christine. So the T14 are obviously the 14 top ranked law schools. I don't know why it's 14. I don't know why it's not 15 or 20. Probably there's a reason for that. And and Barbara, certainly you can speak to this, and this was something that the three of us spoke about in our preparation for today. We have to be honest with you. We can't tell you that your GPA and your LSAT don't matter. Of course they do. They're critically important. And anybody who tells you otherwise, I think, is being a little bit disingenuous. Having said that, it's absolutely true that your personal statement, and many schools give you the opportunity, for example, to include an addendum if there's something that you want that you should tell them about. Many schools ask for a general statement of purpose, and then they'll also give you a list of other essays, perhaps, where you write a shorter essay. So you could be writing a number of pieces, which goes to Barbara's comments about personalizing. At the T14, the essays will bear some weight, certainly. But I think it's pretty accurate to say that LSAT and GPA are going to pretty much carry the day. What I want to say, and I'm not good at math, but there are 200 law schools in the country. I can subtract 14 from 200 and tell you that there's a reason there's 186 other law schools. They all turn out wonderful law grads who have wonderful careers. So I think that one of the problems with the rankings, and as someone who works at a law school that's, you know, a middle ranked law school, certainly not a T14 law school, there are many, many, many opportunities for students to go to law school, have an incredible law school experience, have wonderful careers where they can pursue whatever they want, which aren't in the T14. And I think that's really an important takeaway, because I think sometimes students get so focused on that they feel like, well, if I don't go to a T14 school, I'm going to be an accountant. And I think it's really important, you know, obviously, whatever schools you're going to, jumping off Barbara's theme of doing research for your essays, which is critically important, you also have to do research about the schools. You have to see what their median LSAT and GPA are. What's the top quartile? What's the median quartile, the middle quartile? And be somewhat realistic in your assessment, but try to find a place also that offers something that you want. For example, Cardozo Law School, which is ranked about 60th, has a phenomenal IP, intellectual property program. So if you know you want intellectual property, that's something for you to think about. Maybe you're not getting into a T14 school, but that doesn't mean you can't do what you want. A lot of going to the right school for you, both inside and outside of the T14, involves doing good research, identifying whether you fit into their data points in terms of LSAT and GPA, but also, do they offer what you want? Will you be an attractive candidate to them? But more importantly, will you get what you want out of your legal education?
This is great. I want to, Helena, have you follow up here. I want to ask, when it comes to, thanks for that, Amy, when it comes to rankings, I want to validate some of the things that people, because I think it could be tempting for us to be like, rankings don't matter. But will you help validate this for folks, Helena? And to what extent do higher ranked law schools, and to what extent are they quote unquote better? Like, what's an assumption that someone would have about a higher ranked law school that is true? And then maybe bust a myth for us. What's something that people might know about schools that are not ranked in the top 14?
Sure. I think an assumption about a T14 school that probably is true is that it's going to be easier to get certain types of jobs, right? If you go to a T14, there's just an assumption within the legal community that, I don't know, you're smart, do well on tests, you've developed good analytical skills. So there's a baseline that you don't have to prove, right? It's proven for you just because you have the name of the school. So if you're looking for big law, if you're looking for clerkships, it's going to be an easier path to go down that career direction. I worked at a school in the other 186 in New York City. And in New York City, there are 14 law schools. So there's a lot of competition. There are a lot of law students. The school I worked for was among the lower ranked of those 14 law schools, but offered tremendous opportunities for students going into New York City government. If you were a top student at this school, your opportunities for big law were there. So it's also a question of who you are, right? If you are someone who thrives in competition, you might be very happy at a T14. If you're someone who is interested in legal studies, wants to be a lawyer, maybe doesn't like that kind of intensity, you might be happier at a lower ranked school where the academic competition might feel a little more reasonable for you. And if you do really well, you've got equal opportunities to people at a T14. So the way I think about it is, if you're at a T14 and you're in the top 50% of your class, you're going to have these opportunities. If you're at a school ranked maybe 100 and you're in the top 5%, 10% of your class, you're going to have these same opportunities. So it's really a question of where you're going to be more comfortable and where you're going to succeed the best. And I just want to go back really quickly to something that Barbara said about LSATs and schools, which also is, if your LSAT and GPA is not quite where you think it needs to be for a very competitive school, also don't think that's the end of it.
Mhm.
there are ways to kind of punch above your weight. And we can, I think, talk about that later on.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I'd love to talk about list building just a little bit, and I'll just open this one up to whoever wants to take it. Give us some, if I'm a student, I'm going to apply to law school, I could go and I could just apply to the top 14 schools and just have at and be done. But that might be, I don't know, that might not be the best way. What are some tips that anybody would give about how to develop a good list of law schools to apply to? Why not just apply to the top 14, for example? Anybody?
I'd like to do a little add-on to what Helena said, and just add that I think if you make it through law school and you become a lawyer, there is, whether you go to the T14 or not, there is kind of a presumption about being smart, being able to analyze data, being able to communicate. And so that I encourage people to open up their minds about where you go to school, because you do have a lot going for you just if you get a law degree, both in terms of how people see you, what they perceive as your abilities, and also literally what you are able to do and understand. You can use, there's actually a book about this, but you can use your law degree in thousands of different professions. So it really is a doorway opener. And so I discourage anyone from being, downcast or discouraged by, the T14 rankings, because they may not have the GPA or they may not have the LSATs. There's a world out there where there's a law school for you. Some of them are just geared towards more scholarly things. Some of them are geared towards more clinics and more panels or practical things, and give more clinical opportunities. So as Helena said, really look for what you are interested in getting and where you want to go. And speaking of where you want to go, I'm going to kick this to Amy because she's got a great story about where to go.
Yes, and
in a good way.
But I want to make one more point about what you both said about not going to a T14 school. So the school I teach at is in the greater New York area also, and also ranked around where Helene's school was. And what's interesting is our top students are going to all of the big Manhattan firms. I joke Stephen Cohen should hire me to pick talent for the Mets, because I picked all three of my TAs before grades came out, and all three of them made law review. All three of them are the top editors this year because they stay with me for 2 years. All three of them are going to top firms in Manhattan, and if they'd have gone to Harvard, they couldn't have had better jobs. But one of them turned down big law because she wants family law and she doesn't want New York City life. So she went to a small firm on Long Island. And there's sometimes an advantage to being a big fish in a small pond. If you choose to go to a school that's perhaps slightly below academically where you could get in, well, you're going to be at the top of the class, right? And what that means is when you're at the top, the administration, the career services, they're very interested. Not that they don't want to help all students, but there's something a little attractive, a little sexy, if you will, about that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And to tell the story that Barbara was talking about was when I was deciding where I would go to law school, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I had the option of going to Boston University, which was a nationally ranked school, quite high. And Fordham is highly ranked, but at the time it was below BU. And I was from the greater New York area, and I knew that I wanted to return here ultimately. Well, it was true then, and it's true now, that where you go to law school will absolutely have an impact on where you work, especially if it's not a T14, because think about it, your school has the tentacles of alumni in the area, and many people remain in the area where they went to school. I had deposited at BU, and my father had gone there, so it was very emotional for me to go to BU. Graduated in 1954, the year of Brown versus Board of Ed. I teased him, con law went into effect after that case. And ultimately, I decided to go to Fordham, a slightly lower ranked school, because I knew I wanted to return to New York. And it was 100% the right decision. I've never looked back on it, because again, that strong alumni network combined with, good grades and hard work, which you're going to need wherever you go, really enabled me to have a very successful career. And to be frank, had I gone to BU, I might not have had a positive experience were I attempting to come back to New York. And so that's definitely something to think about.
And I
Ethan,
want to hop in
yep,
there on the, I want to hop in for a second on the subject of law school career services and employability because both with admissions to law school and and throughout law school and graduation from law school, the law schools have a huge investment in you. They want to see you succeed. They want to admit you and they want to see you go on to do the things that are meaningful to you and that will help our world, or whether that's a small area or gigantic area. But they have a big investment in you, and so employability is actually and employment services are a big focus of all law schools because it's part of their ranking is what is the employment rate of the students that get out. So whether you go to a T14 or you go to a differently ranked school, you're going to get support from the career services group of the law school because they want you to succeed and they succeed when you succeed.
So
I
I was
love,
going back,
go
Ethan,
please.
to your
Go
question
please.
about list
Okay.
building and how to start putting a list together.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Amy that regional geographic preferences can be something that you need to take into account. The other thing is that law schools, way more so than what it looks like on the college level, do specialize. And Barbara mentioned that earlier with the IP. But like in college, if you want career computer science, there are lots and lots of colleges where you can do great computer science work. Law schools tend to be a little bit more specialized. So if you want labor law, for instance, there may be 3 or 4 schools where you should really consider applying. And there you may need to be making a choice between my geography and a specific program. And sometimes maybe that specific program is the better way to go if you know this is a particular type of law that I want.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
jump, if I'm sorry, I just want to
Please
add a
go.
quick thing that goes to the list building aspect. So Ethan, as you said, we'd all love to ignore rankings, but it's just not realistic. US News has specialty rankings for law schools, and those are in a million areas: legal writing,
Mhm.
trial advocacy, intellectual property, which I keep going back to, clinical. And interestingly, if you look, many of the schools, like for example, I think I had mentioned Cardozo before for IP, their clinical ranking is maybe 4 or 5, but their overall ranking is significantly lower. So if what you're trying to do is the math of maybe I'm not getting into a T14 school, but I want to get into a school that has the specialty program that I want, look at the specialty rankings. And like I say, some schools really punch above their weight with regard to these specialty programs. Like for my school, our legal writing program is actually ranked 90 spots higher than the overall law school. So we are punching above our weight. And so if those specialty programs are really important to you, and there's about 15 of them, contract law, transactional law, all different things. So it's really worthwhile to delve into those rankings, find a subspecialty you're interested in, and take a look. And that can be a really excellent way of building your list.
That's great advice. It's so true, Amy. It's really broadens your ability to find what you want.
Good.
In a minute, I want to talk about how the different components of the application are weighted and what those even are. But I want to drill back into personal statements because I'm college essay. So, Barbara, when we were putting together some of the content for this, one of the things that you wrote down, I want to read what you wrote. I really like this. The best statements show your progression and growth and include why you, why law, why at that specific school, and why now. Can you say a little more about that?
Sure. I've talked to a lot of law school admissions officers, and it's very clear to me that they really want to know about your experiences and they really want to know what you've learned from them, and whether that's a skill or a soft skill or a hard skill, but also they want you to connect it to law itself in the situations where you're doing the portion of the application, which is your statement for why do you want to go to law school. So the why you and the why law and the kind of why now, you can think of maybe in a way that is more common for you to look at, might be like who, what, where, when, and why. What experience did I have? Where did I have it? What did I learn from it? How can I apply it? Because really the admissions reps are looking for the movement of your growth. If you majored in art and then worked in an art gallery and did everything art related, you are not at all in a disadvantage for getting into law school. In fact, they're intrigued by your path because, well, what is it that moved you? The movement factor from art to law. And that's what you need to explain. Was it wanting to protect artists' rights and product? Were there experiences that you had? Was it your background? Like, how did you get there? What is the trajectory of your growth and the explanation of your movement? So that's how not only will you catch their attention, but you'll be delivering what they really do want to hear.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things we talk a lot about is core values, and those can sometimes be the connective tissue, right? Is the sort of like, here are the superpowers that I've developed, the things that I've been focusing on, and here's how I develop those. Helena, to what extent do students need to know, or to have had experience with law in order to go study law?
Yeah, so I think there are two different types of law school applicants. There are law school applicants who know they want to be a lawyer and they know why they want to be a lawyer. Then there are other applicants who maybe are applying to law school because they're not sure what to do. And so they're thinking law might be a good thing because it is so flexible coming out on the other end. And so the second type of student may have very little experience with law-related activities. Maybe they weren't in law organizations in college. They didn't work during the summer at a law firm. And that's fine. The trick there is just to, I think, Ethan, as you just mentioned, you're going to need to dig into your values and connect, and you'll need to think about how you as a person connects to law in the way that you see it. So law is really broad, right? In law, you can spend time drafting contracts, right? And love it. Spend time arguing for social change and love it. You can do writing and love it. Lots of things in between. So I think if you haven't had experience with law-related activities, you just need to think about, what have you enjoyed so far? What have you been passionate about so far in your life? And how have some of those skills and values connect to what's needed in law school? So in law school, you need dedication, right? You need grit, you need focus, you need drive. So look at where you've done that in your life and emphasize that so that the school will see that you're going to be successful.
Yeah, please jump
add
in.
on there for a second.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that, Helena, because so many law school applicants that I've helped have been really concerned that they didn't have a clear law path or even any experience. They worked in sales or they worked at an ice cream shop, and there are so many transferable skills. And when I say transferable skills in this context, I mean skills that the law schools want that you gain when you're in literally any kind of job. So the real challenge for a law school applicant is to reframe how they think about themselves, and don't think of themselves as, a salesperson or an ice cream scooper at 31 Flavors or Salt and Straw or, wherever, but instead to realize that anytime that you're dealing, for example, in a customer service position, you are thinking on your feet, you are assessing needs, you are relating to people, you are staying calm in a chaotic situation, you are paying attention to detail. You know, I mean, I could give you 25 things that you do just as scooping ice cream that actually law schools are interested in, because you are developing your ability to analyze, you're developing your soft skills in relating to people, in creating a culture, in understanding diverse populations, and creating a good environment. And law school today is different than it, you know, was on some of the old shows about law schools. Law schools want well-rounded people who can relate and communicate and collaborate. So it's not, yes, critical thinking is crucial for being a lawyer, and that is what law school teaches you. Soft skills are something that if you have them, you're going to have an edge when you enter law school, because it is just about equal in value out there in the world and to a law school with ability to think critically. So I just want to encourage people who are applying to law school to show those aspects, show those skills that you got, you know, as you, like I said, you know, in your trajectory of growth, because they are important.
A lot of our listeners will be familiar with the undergrad personal statement or the undergrad why us essay or why this college essay. What advice would you give to students who are, you know, coming into this process for the first time? How is it similar or how is it different from, we started to talk a little bit about it, but I'd love for you to get a little more of the details.
Sure. Thank you. That was a question I wanted to most answer. I guess because I teach writing, it's there. And jumping off from what Barbara and Helena said, also that's so interesting is I've had students who are coming straight from college who said, "Oh my God, I'm so boring, they won't want me." And I said, "Oh, no, no, no." And I've had students who've worked who said, "I've worked or I raised a family. What does that have to do with being a lawyer?" And I said, "Oh, a heck of a lot." And it's roughly 50-50 between students who come right from college and students who've worked first. It's not like business school where you have to work. So I say, whichever your scenario is, you turn it into a strength, because it is a strength, right? I taught a student who was a former New York City police officer, and I said to him, "You will have skills that will be immensely appealing in a law firm." And, you know, those were not necessarily policing the office, but just in terms of problem solving, working collaboratively, all those types of softer skills, as you said, Barbara. So I think Barbara gave a really nice holistic sort of explanation of what they're looking for. This whole idea that basically you really want to give a sense of who you are, what your values are, and why you want to be a lawyer. And, you know, CEG has on its website under the graduate division, under the law school division specifically, some sample law school essays. For example, one of them was a former student of mine who had worked in a family law department as a paralegal. And one of the women who was abused had asked her to go to court with her for moral support. And the student was sitting there frustrated by the process and said, "I've got to go to law school because I can't do enough to help her." And that was the subject of her essay. So she spoke about her studies, her work experience, and what moved her to be a lawyer. And those are the kinds of things we're looking for. But also, and again, I guess because teaching writing is my bread and butter, I do have to hit on the mechanics a little bit. Understand that when they are reading your essays, the admissions folks, they're not only reading your essay, many of the admissions officers are lawyers, or they're people like Barbara and apparently Christine, who are lawyer adjacent in their experiences. So they're pretty sophisticated readers, right? So they want to see if you'll be a good lawyer. So the first thing is mechanics matter, okay? I mean, I always say to my students, and they look at me like I'm nuts, "Would you go to a job interview without zipping your pants or brushing your hair?" And they're thinking, what is she talking about? When you submit an essay with a typo or a misspelling or a grammatical error, that's exactly what you've done, and you've immediately lost the respect of the reader. So those kinds of mechanics really matter. The other thing is, what are lawyers? Lawyers are advocates, right? You advocate for your client. Look at the example I just gave. Well, when you're writing your essay, you're advocating for yourself. You are your own client. And if you can't effectively present yourself, then how are you going to be able to effectively represent a client down the line? And this is something people will be really aware of. The other thing is, cover all your bases. Okay, you don't get to write a legal brief and then go to court a week later and say, "Your Honor, I was very busy last week. I thought of 3 more good reasons I should have put in the brief. I'd love to hand in another brief." I think we have a pretty good idea of how that would be received. Well, as Barbara had said before when we were talking, when you submit your personal statement, and again, some of these supplemental essays also, there's generally 2 or 3 really, sometimes even 4 writing experiences as part of the application. Cover all your bases. Don't keep hitting on the same thing over and over. In one spot, talk about why you want to go to law school. In another, talk about how your experience as a first-generation college student impacted you and what it'll mean to you to be a first-generation lawyer in your family. So cover all your bases in the writing opportunities you have and try to show the reader who you are and give them a full picture. And then the final one is my favorite one. You may have heard that I said I was an English major. And one of the things I was very worried about when I went to law school was that I would find it boring. You read a case and a case says what it says. Well, never was I happier to be wrong. The joy in the law is not in the black and white in the cases, it's all in the grays. That's where the creativity comes in, right? And that's what you want to try to do in crafting your essays. You want to find those grays. You want to be creative and present yourself in a way that isn't the typical way. What can I do that'll make myself look different than other people? So these 4 ideas are a great idea for your college essay, but I'm telling you right now, if you get in and you go to law school, they're also going to have a very large impact on how you actually start to turn yourself into a lawyer. It would be by sort of hitting on these 4 aspects.
Neat. And yet, and I love that you talked about some of these other elements because it's not resting on one, essay, right? Helena, will you talk a little bit about some of these other opportunities in the application process and just some tips that you'd have for students making the most of these other opportunities? So give us a sense of what they are, what are the other components, and then, yeah, what any advice that you'd give on those components.
So I'm going to go first just to the advice piece.
Great.
Just because the first answer is it depends, because it varies by school. But in terms of advice, I think don't underestimate how important it is to connect to a school to figure out what to write about. So if you have a particular interest, look up the professors, email the professors, tell them you saw that they do research on blank and you'd love to have the opportunity to talk to them. Law professors love to talk about their work. My guess is 90% of the time you'll get a positive response. Set up a meeting with the professor, talk a little bit about what's going on at that school with this particular subject, and then incorporate that into your application. If there's a logical place to put it in the actual questions, great. If not, send a message to the director of admissions. Hi, Director Ethan. Just wanted to let you know I'm applying to your law school. I just had a great conversation with Professor Christine, and I would be so excited to be participating in her clinic, blah, 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 blah. That will go into your admissions file, even though it might not be part of the actual application. And it goes a long way to showing real interest in the school.
Love this. I'm just curious, Barbara or Amy, do you have thoughts about other components of the application and how tips for students making the most of them?
Well, I do want to emphasize that law school readers are remarkably attached to error-free essays. And it seems maybe even a little bit irrational because they know that you care and that you want to come to law school, but for some reason a lot of them are English geeks, or maybe you might even say English freaks, and it just hijacks their minds when they can't control it at all. It hijacks their minds when they see a grammar error or a spelling error or something else, and even though they want to believe that you care, you are at a disadvantage. So I encourage people that part of the application forming really have other people read it and read it out loud and read it backwards and all of the other kind of things that you can do to make sure get help, because every writer, every editor needs an editor. That's just a rule of law, that for sure you can't with so much effort that you're going to put into those essays, you can't find your own mistakes.
Yeah. One question came in about AI from the chat here. And Anonymous asked, can you please say something about the anticipated role of AI and what it might mean for jobs for new law school grads? So I want to make this a two-part AI question, and anybody can grab this one. Part one, is there any place for using AI in the application process when they're, for example, doing research or in any part of the sort of application process? And then separate question, the sort of larger question, what's going to happen if you had to kind of look into your crystal ball in terms of how AI is going to impact, law school grads?
I'll start
So,
with how you can use AI to research schools. I think that that's a very effective way, especially if you have some components in terms of subject area, location, size. It's a good research tool for that.
Mhm.
So in terms of helping you build your list, it can build a decent list and at least help you get started to think what things you might want to consider. So
And I would
one
say,
little scratch there for AI.
I would say it's helpful to start building your list. I personally wouldn't trust it to
Oh,
build
I
my
agree.
list because I've used AI to research various questions and it's just not always accurate.
Mhm.
but I read this morning in the newspaper that somebody used AI to build a weekly food plan and it was perfect. So I guess AI does have its uses. So
It
I think
depends
that
on your definition of perfect.
they didn't die, I guess. I don't know. So in terms of the application process, if there's one thing that I think is the overarching thing you're getting from all of us, and frankly, I think College Essay Guy infuses so well into the essay writing process for college and undergrads, is you really got to get a lot of heart and soul in there. You're talking about your values, you're talking about who you are as a person. Well, I'm sorry, ChatGPT doesn't know me. I don't care what I put in. If I can't do a better job of writing about myself, and I'm also participating in the writing your own personal statement as an adult exercise that we've been doing. If I can't do a better job of writing about myself than ChatGPT can, then I think there's a problem. So that's my answer on the ChatGPT piece. With regard to the practice of law, if question you had raised, Ethan, it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's something we're very much struggling with in legal academia. My personal opinion, the expression is you can't build a house without a solid foundation, right? So I do not believe that students in first year legal writing should be using AI, because how can you know if you're doing good research or writing when you've never done it yourself?
Mhm.
Do I think that second and third year students who have that solid foundation and are getting closer to practice should perhaps have some exposure to AI so they can tell employers they're practice ready? Absolutely. But I personally really don't believe, and I know a lot of my colleagues really don't believe, that we're doing a service to first year students if we don't teach them how to research and write, because they don't have the ability to discern. We've all seen the stories in the newspaper about how AI hallucinates and is making up these fake cases, right? This has been throughout the media. Well, if you don't know how to do research on your own, how are you going to have the tools to sort out what's good and what's not so good?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we all agree 100% that any use of AI at any point requires really diligent checking. And so, in order to diligently check it, you have to have the skills. And law schools, in terms of the admissions applications, I also know we agree 100% across the board, do not use AI for your law school application because when you look at what law schools really are looking for, they are looking to see, can you think critically? Can you communicate, as Amy was saying? Can you analyze data? Can you relate to people and have a flexible style? What was your journey? AI cannot help you with any of those things.
It has no heart.
Yeah. Let's talk financial aid. A couple folks are asking about how does financial aid even work when you're applying to law school? So I'll ask a specific question. Do the top law schools offer merit aid or only need-based financial aid? And anybody can take it.
I guess my answer, with limited knowledge, that's my disclaimer because I'm a lawyer. It really does depend. But the one financial aid tip that I would pass on for scholarships that are from the school is that a lot of scholarships from schools are conditional, and they're conditional on your grades, and you need to be aware of that.
I can give a sort of, it's going to sound slightly cynical, but I think it's actually more practical than cynical.
Right.
So you know how we were talking about schools beyond the T14 and looking to see what you want? Well, cynically, GPA and LSAT are obviously a critical part of what US News looks like in the rankings. There are many students who intentionally choose to go to a law school that is not the best school they get into, where they're in the tippy top qualification wise, because they will get a free ride. And most financial aid at schools that are not T14 is much more based on merit than it is based on financial need, unfortunately. So there are many students who have gone to a lesser school, been a really big fish in a smaller pond, and excelled and graduated with no debt at all. So it's definitely something to think about when you're building your list.
And Amy, I
And
don't
I'll
think
just,
that's cynical. I think that's just realistic.
I do
Okay, thank
too.
you. Because I
And
felt a little bad saying it, but I think it's an important, you know, everybody's got their own reasons for doing what they do, and I think that's an important thing to think about.
right, well, lower ranked law schools are using scholarship offers to lure in students.
Top
And
students,
And T14 schools don't need to.
right?
so there
Yeah.
are a few T14s that just don't offer merit aid. They only offer need-based scholarships. Yale, Harvard, and Stanford, I think. But there are a bunch that offer merit at the T14, but they're gonna offer more need-based. So there's, I think Columbia is the only one that offers a full ride, but you know, or sorry, Chicago. Chicago offers the full ride. But Michigan offers one as well. So you can check those out individually. But yeah, T14 need, non-T14 merit.
They just don't have the money is the honest answer.
Mhm.
To what extent do extracurricular activities matter? Someone's asking. Is it better to just focus on GPA in college instead of spending so much time on activities and steal hours away? Or are there certain activities that are really valued by the, let's say, by the, you know, by the folks looking at admission school apps that they're really worth investing in?
I would say it's not that there are certain activities
Mhm.
that are worth investing in, but I would say there are activities. It's worth it to be invested in your community. And it should be in something that you are passionate about and enjoy doing. And anything that fits that bill is going to translate well into a law school application. So you don't have to be part of the pre-law club, right? You could be part of the I Love Dancing club.
Hmm.
And if
Right.
you love dancing, you'll be able to write really well about dance and about how that brings out parts of you. So it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be anything specific, but it does need to be something. I would say an application that comes in with GPA and LSAT, but nothing else,
Mhm.
wouldn't be all that attractive.
And you want to weave it into the fabric of this whole story that you're telling. So for example, I had a student who grew up with a younger brother who was severely disabled, and he was extremely invested in helping his family provide the best possible services. So what did he write his essay about? Why going to law? He wanted to be an education lawyer because he wanted to work with special needs children.
Mhm.
So this wasn't an extracurricular activity, but man, oh man, it told you everything you needed to know about who he was. And that was the field he ended up pursuing. And it was just a joy to watch it. So to me, who would have cared if he was in the pre-law society? He had a passion and he shared it. And that to me was so critical in why this student was admitted.
Yeah, I think that the specific activities are not so important as it is how do the pieces connect? How does the puzzle connect to law? How is it part of the journey?
Mhm. One of the things we promised folks we'd share is some do's and don'ts for the application. So maybe we can go round the horn, as it were, you know, style of just a do and a don't for the application. And whoever's ready can share theirs first, and then we'll see who's next. Ready?
So I'm ready.
Go.
There are lots of questions on the law school application you might not want to answer honestly, but you have to answer them honestly. They're going to ask about um, criminal behavior. They're going to ask about academic dishonesty. If you do not answer them honestly on your law school application, I promise it will come haunt you down the line, because the law school needs to certify you to the bar and you need to fill out a bar application. And those applications are even more intensive and they will check. And if you get caught in a lie later on down the line, that's a very difficult situation to get yourself out of. And you'll find, I think, that most law school admissions readers know that there's a certain amount of activity that may have gone on prior to your law school application. That's okay.
And
Now,
New York is a disclosure jurisdiction, so if you've disclosed it on your application, probably not true with a felony, but with something minor like what you're talking about, that's a brilliant point, because I've had students get themselves in trouble with that. So if you've
absolutely.
disclosed it on the application, you're going to be okay when you apply to the bar. That was
Right. And if it's something major, you need to deal with it early on in the process. Right. So if it is a felony, for instance, you may need some assistance in figuring out what you're presenting, but do that on the application.
I'd say that a do that I will offer is to do tell the readers the context of what you've done. For example, just using the activities as an example, or your extracurricular activities, maybe you don't have any, but the context of that is that your family didn't have very a good economic situation, and you had to use all of your time both to take the highest paying job that you could, work as many hours as you could, and use the rest of your time fulfilling your family responsibilities. The law school admission readers need to know that that is your situation, so that you can put into context the kinds of things that you did do and the kinds of things that you did learn. And do you want don'ts, Ethan, or are we just on dudes? Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay, so do give context for the things that, as Helena was discussing, it might be a little touchy, but it really gives the readers the picture. But don't be concerned about telling anything about your background, cultural background, racial background, because you're interpreting the Supreme Court's decision about affirmative action. It doesn't impact what you write at all. They can read anything that you write. The Supreme Court opinion has to do with what the school guidelines are. It does not impact how they read your story or what is going to influence them as you tell your story on purpose for going to law school.
So my do relates to actually my sort of cynical / practical comment. I think it's really important to cast a wide net. I think you should apply to schools where you're hitting a little bit above your weight class, because who knows, maybe you'll get lucky. They'll like your essay. You just don't know what any individual year holds. And also apply to schools slightly below your weight class. Maybe it's a very competitive years and schools you thought you might get into, you won't, or maybe for financial reasons. But I think it's important in that list building that you really cast that wide net so that you don't preclude your ability to go to school, which gets to my don't, which is don't think your life is over if you're not going to a T14 school. 186, baby, 186, that's the way to go.
So my don't is don't be the only person who sees your application before you submit it.
Yeah.
So I'll say, don't underestimate the number of drafts that you're gonna have to write to get your essay into shape. Do start early, and I'll conclude with a don't start your essay off with a quotation that's famous in law. Please, we beg you.
I want to do some. Those are great, really practical tips. I want to do some like jumping around. A couple folks had some questions in the chat, and I'm going to share a couple resources. for someone was asking to know a little bit more about some of the requirements. What are they even looking for? We've got a blog post on that. We've got a blog post for most things. And it'll walk through some of what the requirements are. That post also talks about different majors. It talks about application deadlines, some of the sort of nuts and bolts that we haven't necessarily gotten into here. There are also, fun fact, some LSAT optional schools. Let's talk just for a minute in a second about that. And here's a list and an article about a blog about, different LSAT optional. The question that I have, by the way, is it really LSAT optional, or is it, what is that? Is that a real thing? And I say that because sometimes students go, well, they say it's optional, but for example, with the SAT, some students believe that you really can't get it unless you have an awesome SAT score, which by the way, isn't necessarily true for undergrad. So I'd love to hear a little more about that. And then one more resource for those of you who are wondering about financial aid resources. We've got sort of we're linking to an LSAC resource for paying for law school, what the options are as it relates to that. But I'd love to just hear from anybody who's got any strong or somewhat strong preferences or thoughts about, is it, when they say LSAT optional, is it really optional? Thoughts?
Yes and no.
It depends.
And now some will allow you to submit the GRE or the LSAT, but some of them are not going to consider you for certain kinds of aid, financial aid, if you don't submit an LSAT score. So I would, if your reason for not submitting the LSAT is that you prepared well, you were disciplined and diligent, and you took it and you just didn't score well, that's one thing. But it's because you don't feel like preparing. Think again.
Yeah.
It's
Reconsider.
interesting to me too that the no LSAT and the GRE thing felt like it was really picking up steam, and now it seems to have completely petered out. So it's kind of interesting to me. So the fact that it doesn't seem to be sort of an engine chugging along makes me feel like maybe falling onto that category isn't the wisest thing to do.
I tend to really trust admissions officers. I think, they're not the enemy. They're not there sitting there going, well, let's think of who we can deny.
Right.
They're really trying to build a class. And I think if they say LSAT's optional, honestly, I would believe them. I don't think they're trying to trick people.
Yeah.
So I do think if you don't submit an LSAT, you need to make sure there's really strong other components.
That's making the case for what the LSAT would be making the case for, right? Well, let's talk just briefly, because we didn't talk about, someone asked in the chat, how much or how long should students study for the LSAT? So what's a good timeline in terms of preparation? And then I'm going to ask part 2 of that, who would be willing to just walk us through sort of like a timeline for applying to law school? Give us the sense of how long this takes, and when should students be doing what, be thinking about what? Who feels ready for that one?
I'll do the LSAT one. And I'm sorry, I have to go back to Barbara's first comment. It depends. Some people can prepare once, take the LSAT and do really well. And that preparation can be, let's say, 3 months. And I personally would say you need to not prepare on your own. You can do you don't have to do an in-person. You can do an online course. You can do a self-paced online course. But I don't think just cracking open a book and doing it makes sense, because the LSAT has, unfortunately, outsized weight in the process. But there are other people who do that 3 months, they take the LSAT, don't get a score they like, they do another 3 months, they take the LSAT again, don't get a score they like, do it again, don't get a score they like. So I worked with a student who got the same LSAT score 3 times. And at that point, thankfully thought, okay, enough. Like, this is my score. Let me work the rest of the application. So it depends, but I think you start with the 3 months and see how it goes on your first round.
Can I throw a little wrench into that for
Do
1
it.
second with respect to the LSAT, like even score? I mean, schools do weigh things differently, different parts of the application differently, depending on which school it is, depending on where you are in your career. If you're right out of, college, they're going to look at things differently than if you have had a career. They're looking for strength and either academic success or career success accomplishments. And so for somebody that maybe just is not a great tester, I was a terrible tester. I'm a terrible standardized tester. But they look for strong recommendations. And so helping your recommender by helping the recommender help you and understand what you really need from them is crucial, especially, always, but especially if your LSAT isn't what you want it to be.
And one thing also to throw out is, I completely agree with you, Elena, that not taking an LSAT course in some form is a mistake. I think you need the accountability. I think you need the outside expertise, but there are some available that are free of charge. I believe Khan Academy offers one such course. But there are definitely things that are available. The other thing is, I believe through some pre-law offices at certain universities or through the vendor themselves, there is some there is some financial help available to take those courses. Because I don't want anybody to think, well, they're suggesting that, but that's just not realistic for me financially. So I do believe that there is some ways to ease that sort of a financial burden, because to me, the burden of that, the benefit you're going to get from it is significant and substantial.
So I want to jump in and maybe address a little bit about Ethan's question and see what everyone thinks with respect to what your timeline should be. And truly, again, it requires research because not all law schools have the same deadlines. There are different types of deadlines. You have to understand, just like undergraduate school, there's different ways to apply, there's different standards, but I personally would say at a minimum, and I do mean it as a minimum, you should allow yourself 4 months to process through how you're going to write your essays, do your research. A year is much better, but a minimum of 4 months, just once you know your schools, to develop those essays and refine them and draft, redraft, and redraft. But what do you folks think?
My minimum is more like 6 to 7 months. I'm thinking sort out your recommenders in February, think about your summer jobs or internships, do a little bit of test prep every day. March, you could form your list. April, you could sort of get on a spreadsheet and start tracking what each school requires and what what the lengths of the essays, the optional essays, the optional addenda. You're gonna continue test prep every week. Then you prepare your resume. Maybe in May, you could take your first LSAT test in June. Over the summer, you could write your essays, rewrite your essays, take tests, and plan on submitting in September.
Love that. We're at time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
So sorry. I was just going to say quickly, the early bird gets the worm. There's definitely an advantage to applying early, and here's why. Sometimes if you apply early and you're right where they want, they'll say, well, gee, we don't want them to go somewhere else. We're going to accept them now. And that's very advantageous. Sometimes if you wait till the end of the session, they may say, well, you're on the lower end. We've accepted some lower end. We'd rather not accept you or wait for higher ones to come in. So I do sometimes think applying earlier can absolutely have a benefit. Sorry about that.
Awesome. No, that's beautiful. Thank you. That's a great tip to close on. Barbara and Helena and Amy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. Christine, take us out here. What would you like folks to keep in mind or to remember as we close here?
I would like you to keep in mind that if you are interested in working with Barbara or Amy or Helena or any of our other law school coaches, let us know. And we'd be happy to tell you all about that process and what it looks like applying with College Essay Guy.
Awesome. We'll share a link out. You can just go to the website to find that link for essay coaching, and we'll follow up with that via email as well. Thanks y'all again so much for being here, and we'll see y'all soon. Bye.
Thank you.